welcome back for another episode of Women in White Coats. This week we have Dr. Lexie Mannix, who is board certified in emergency medicine. She graduated from FSU College of Medicine in 2014. She works at UF Health in Jacksonville, Florida as an emergency medicine physician, but she also wears several hats within the residency program that they have there. She is also the editor-in-chief of SheMd, which is an amazing community for women in medicine. And I'm just very excited for y'all to meet her because she is just a phenomenal person, and I'm very excited that she's FSU Com alumni and that I get to meet people like this, and I'm very happy that she agreed to allow me to interview her. So, without further ado, here's episode 10 of Women in White Coats by MD Tribe. Welcome back for another interview of Women in White Coats. I'm very excited for today's interview. We have Dr. Mannix. So can you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Alexandra Mannix, but I go by Lexie. I am an emergency medicine doctor and a Florida State College of Medicine graduate. So I'm super excited to chat with you, another FSU medical student today.
Yes, I love FSU Com alumni, and I'm definitely biased. But we'll go ahead and dive right in. So when was the earliest part of your life that you can remember that you wanted to become a doctor?
So it's so funny because, for me, I was the 3-year-old who was telling everybody that I was going to be a doctor. I grew up with pretty bad asthma and was, in and out of the hospital as a kid. And the only thing that I ever thought I wanted to do was to be a doc. And it's so funny, when we were in, I think it was 4th grade, everyone had to write on this little piece of paper what they wanted to be when they grow up and throw it into a hat. And then everybody had to guess what it was, right? Who had put that in. And some people put in teacher or police officer. And I wrote that I wanted to be an asthma allergy pediatric specialist. I had not a doctor. I was I'm going to do a residency and a fellowship in these areas. And that's the kind of doctor I'm going to be. I was that kid at 8 years old. So I've kind of always known. Now, that doesn't mean that my path here was incredibly straightforward, but it was always kind of my goal.
Awesome. Do you have anybody in your family that's in medicine?
So I don't, or I didn't at the time. I have an older cousin who's a few years older than me who did go to medical school before I did, but we don't come from a family of physicians. My mom graduated high school. My dad didn't. My grandparents on my mom's side didn't go to high school. So I don't really come from a family of even college degrees. My generation were the first people that went to college, nonetheless, to get a professional degree.
Okay. Now, kind of leading into your college experience, you went to UF. So can you tell us what degree you pursued? What degree you pursued, kind of your experience with MCAT and applying to medical school?
Sure. So like I said, I went into undergrad knowing that I wanted to go into medicine. So like everybody else, I decided I was going to be a bio major. And after a semester, I was why am I doing this when my entire career is going to be about science, right? That kind of hard science. I'm going to go to med school. I'm going to do all this stuff. Why not use this time to learn something else?
Yeah.
So I kind of started experimenting with other options. I took a linguistics class. I took some psych classes. I took a sociology class, and then I just fell in love with sociology. I accidentally ended up in a 4,000 level sociology class my freshman year of college because I didn't know what I was doing. And it was actually a gender course, which is funny because it's probably changed the entire trajectory of my life and my career. But I ended up falling in love with sociology and ended up getting a degree in that while also doing all of my medicine prereqs at the same time. So it was a very interesting experience to go from like inorganic chemistry to like marriage and families, right? But
Yeah.
it's funny because I feel like that's actually what my life is like on a daily basis, jumping from social issues to pure medicine to kind of something in between.
That's awesome. And would you say, did you apply straight to medical school or did you take any gap years?
Ooh, that's a good question. So like I said, my trajectory wasn't really straight. And the story I'm about to tell you is part of the reason I do a lot of the things I do. So I applied to medical school straight out of undergrad and I actually got accepted. And then my spot was rescinded by the school that I applied to because I didn't have the money to pay for my like down payment to hold my spot. So I was working full time in college, yeah, and I was waiting to like get my paycheck so I could send them the check, and they rescinded my acceptance, which is like something I have such a fundamental problem with across the board. You know, we look at where medical students come from, both geographically and socioeconomically. And this is just a perfect example about how people that may not have the same financial resources can be systematically like eliminated from going into medicine.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to take a year off after my acceptance had gotten rescinded. So I took a year. I got a certificate in public health, which was basically like half an MPH. And I worked full time in an emergency department while I kind of got my stuff together to reapply.
Okay. Your second time applying, you decided to go to Florida State. Is that the same school that rescinded your offer?
That was not the school
Okay.
that rescinded my offer. That was a totally different school that I never considered again. I never applied there. I didn't apply there for residency just because I fundamentally couldn't align with the decisions they made as an institution. But yes, the next year that I applied, I got into FSU, and that was the school I chose to go to, which I'm so glad. And I honestly can't imagine what my life would have been like had I gone to that other school, had I even been in the class ahead of my class that I ended up being in. I think everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, definitely. And okay, so coming from UF as a Gator, I have a lot of classmates that are Gators, and they kind of all share the sentiment that the culture is very different at FSU. Would you share the same sentiments?
So I think you're comparing apples to oranges, right? So like your undergraduate experience is never going to be the same as your medical school experience, right? Like they're very different cultures. It's a very different like size class even that you're in, right?
Yeah.
So I think that when I got to FSU Com, there were some things that I didn't expect. Like the first day I was walking down the hall and Dr. Leadham, who's one of our deans, called me Lexie, which meant he not only knew who I was, but knew that I don't go by Alexandra and I go by Lexie, right? Which just felt like home. And I can't say what UF Com would have been like because I don't know. But my undergrad experience was certainly not like that because I was in a class of 200 other people taking biology. But I don't know what undergrad would have been like at FSU or at any school because I think undergrad and med school are just such different ball games in terms of the culture that's created in them.
Okay. And what was your experience like in medical school?
Oh, what do you mean exactly?
Like, I don't know, I guess just an overall, like, how was your experience? Like, would you do it all over again? What was your least favorite part, your favorite part, that kind of stuff?
So I would definitely do it all over again. I personally found med school to be more fun than undergrad. I felt like I was with a bunch of people who worked really hard, but also had a lot of fun. I have some of like my best friends in the whole world were my classmates in medical school that I still keep in touch with. It was just a really awesome, like, growing experience. And so funny because I look back at that time, right? And I was like 22 years old. And I feel like that was just such a long time ago, even though it was only like 10 years ago. But I feel like I've grown so much since starting. And some of that started while in med school and then has kind of continued since. But I had such a great time. I did my 3rd and 4th year in Pensacola, which I didn't expect to end up there, which is a whole separate story in itself, but ended up going to Pensacola and had such an amazing experience. I had so much hands-on moments. So like the first delivery I'd ever seen, like I was a part of. The first surgery I'd ever been in, like I was assisting. It was so much more hands-on medicine than I think people at other schools may experience.
Yeah. What number did you rank Pensacola when you were doing matching?
So I don't know if we ranked them. We had to write like a blurb about why we wanted to go where we wanted to go.
Okay.
And I ended up not getting either of the places I said I wanted to go to. And I ended up getting put in Sarasota. And I was like, I can't live in Sarasota. So I ended up finding someone to switch with me, like who happened to randomly want to go to Sarasota, and they happened to be in Pensacola. Like it was very random. I don't even know how I ended up there, but I loved it.
Yeah. And did you get lots of emergency medicine exposure there?
So, I mean, I think in my 3rd year, there were times we would go down to the ED. I remember on my surgery rotation getting called in like overnight to do an operation with my attending. We had to go see the patient in the emergency department. Or when I was on my orthopedic call, I remember going down to the ED. But I didn't really get a ton of exposure in emergency medicine until my 4th year, which is pretty common at countless institutions. Which I think makes it hard for people who really are considering emergency medicine, that you have to wait until 4th year to really get exposure.
So how did you come to decide that emergency medicine was a specialty for you?
So I think maybe I always knew a little bit. Like I said, I'd worked in an emergency department during my gap year. But when I first got to med school, I really thought maybe family medicine. So I had a degree in public health. I had spent a bunch of time kind of thinking about things from that perspective. And in my mind, it felt like then you go into family medicine, right? And I loved the idea of taking care of children all the way up to the elderly. Like I loved the idea of kind of being a little bit of an expert in everything to a certain extent. So I thought family medicine for a really long time. And then I did my ortho rotation and I was like, sure, I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. Like I loved ortho. Looking back, I realized I loved ortho trauma. Like I thought ortho trauma was really cool and I liked reducing fractures and I liked that kind of stuff. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do going into 4th year, but I scheduled my emergency medicine rotations. And at that point we were doing external rotations too. So I scheduled those thinking maybe EM was right for me. And like day one, I was sure those were my people. I think there's a certain type of person that goes into EM. Like, for example, I'm not wearing a white coat because I cannot find any white coats in like any part of my life. I don't know where they are because we don't wear them. And being around EM people, I just felt like I was at home. It's a little bit crazy. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to walk in your door. You have to know a little bit or a lot of it about everything. And I really like being in the hospital rather than being in the clinic. And then to kind of tie it all back, like when I was thinking about how to apply my public health stuff, I felt like I needed to do family medicine or internal medicine or something like that. And then I realized like EM does so much public health. Like we are the safety net. We are the backup for everyone for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get to experience things that other people that sit, let's say, in our areas of privilege don't get to experience.
Yeah.
I can deliver a baby. I can take care of someone who just doesn't have insurance. I can take care of, a mom and some children who were in a car accident, and then my next patient will be a 65-year-old male who has heart failure. I see, people that are homeless. I see people that have substance abuse problems. I see kind of a little bit of everything. And I think I have a really interesting experience and insight into the world by acting as an EM doc.
Yeah.
And what I hope to do and what I try to do is use those experiences from a public health perspective into helping shape like the community that I work in.
That's awesome. I really like that. I know also one of the really popular things about EM is that y'all do shift work. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. So right now, generally my shifts are 8 hours, either 7A to 3P, 3P to 11P, or 11P to 7A. There are a couple other like random times that we work. The nice thing theoretically about EM is you work your shift, you go home, you don't bring your work home with you. And I think some people really enjoy that. I needed more than that. So shift work is fantastic, but I do a lot of other things outside of just clinical work. So I kind of end up bringing my work home with me a little bit more than other people do.
Okay. But you have the freedom to do that, right? Like you're not.
Absolutely. You don't have to do anything outside of your clinical work. You can do your shifts and you can go home. It's a really good option for people that either want to be able to travel or want to be able to do like a completely different job or side hustle or whatever, because you can kind of build your life around your shifts, which is really cool.
Okay. And what was your experience like applying to residency?
So trying to like think back, it was a few years ago. So I would have been applying in 2013. I don't remember how many programs I applied to, and I feel like that's a very hot topic now. But 7 years ago, everything was kind of a little bit different. I remember I interviewed at 10 places, the 10th place being the program that I ended up matching at. And I remember how much travel was, both like on me emotionally and physically. Like you're just traveling and you're going from one place to another and you have to always be on. But then it was also really difficult financially because it can be really expensive. And I remember instead of flying, driving really long distances because I just couldn't afford another flight. So that's, I think, going to be one of the benefits for the students this year is you don't have to accrue all those costs, but I think it's going to be really hard for them this year to figure out kind of where they want to go.
Yeah, because you don't get to see the place and like interact with the people in person. Okay. And when you were applying to residency, I know you mentioned you did some external rotations. Did you do away rotations in emergency medicine?
Yeah, so I did 2 rotations in EM outside of my Pensacola rotation. One was in New Orleans, and then the other was in New York. The reason I chose both of those places is because I had somewhere free to stay. So that's where I went.
Okay.
It was a really great exposure. I got to see some different styles of emergency medicine, different communities, different like ways that people practice and what it's like to be involved in those communities. And I thought it was a really valuable experience to help me figure out kind of where I wanted to be for residency.
Okay. And what do you feel like, I guess, the top 3 things that set you apart as an applicant?
So I think my public health experience was something that kind of set me apart in terms of having a better idea of what a safety net hospital looked like.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember interviewing with someone at a program that I ended up not ranking, who told me that my application looked like a family medicine doctor and he didn't understand why I was applying to emergency medicine because of all my public health work. And I think, again, like I was talking about before, I think that's like a bias that we carry, and we don't think about how much public health emergency medicine truly does. So the places that valued my public health experience, I think that helped distinguish me. I also think my leadership experience, I did a lot of leadership activities in medical school. I was part of our council, like medical student council. I was part of the Congress of Graduate Students, which was like all the grad schools. I was the president of a couple of organizations. I was the vice president of my class. And I kind of had a lot of balls in the air. I helped create a couple of different fundraisers, and I learned how to juggle a lot of things. And I think that actually ended up making me a better EM doc, both from having some leadership experience, because EM really is a lot of leadership, but also having many tasks at the same time and figuring out how to balance them. So I think having those leadership experiences throughout med school and even before really kind of helped show what skills I brought to the table. The third, I would say, was not my grades. How about what didn't distinguish me? So I have always been an average student. Like, I'm a B+ student. My STEP scores were right around average for people that were applying to EM. I've never been the top of my class. I was not AOA. I've never been that kind of student. And I think that's okay. You know, I feel like there's so much competition to be perfect. And I think having okay grades is okay. But show off the other skills that you have, right? Like the leadership skills that I think I brought to the table, other people didn't, even if my grades weren't as perfect as theirs.
Okay. And you mentioned that the STEP score was at average. What would you say the average STEP score is now for EM?
So I think STEP 1's like 230 and STEP 2 is like 240.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range.
Okay. And then you mentioned AOA. Can you briefly explain what that is?
So I think most med schools have an AOA organization, which is Alpha Omega Alpha. I don't know because I wasn't a part of it. But it's basically an honor society that's selected normally in your 4th year of medical school, and it's students who are in like the top 10% of your class, which was not me. Was never going to be me.
Okay. And then I know after you did your residency, you pursued a fellowship. Is that right?
Yeah. So I did a fellowship in medical education and simulation up in Chicago, where I worked at 3 different residency programs, kind of teaching residents, which was a really awesome and cool experience. I got to grow a lot as an educator. I got to spend a year in Chicago, which was amazing and freezing and so many things. But it was a really great and like growing, learning experience. At this point in academics and emergency medicine, in order to get into academics, most people do a fellowship of some sort. And there's lots of fellowships offered out of emergency medicine. The one I chose just happened to be the one that I was most interested in.
Okay. And that was just 1 year, right?
That was 1 year. Yep. So I finished fellowship in 2018, and then I found a grown-up job or my official like faculty job after that.
Okay. And so where are you now?
That's a great question. I'm like, I don't know where I am right now. No, I'm kidding. So I am at the University of Florida College of Medicine in Jacksonville, Florida, which is where I did my residency. I am the assistant residency director, the assistant clerkship director, which is like 4th year medical students that rotate with us. I'm also the medical director for our simulation center for our whole institution. So I kind of help do medical education from a simulation perspective for nurses and techs and residents and faculty and kind of all across the board. So I wear a couple of different hats. And then also, obviously, I'm an emergency medicine doctor, so I work clinically as well.
Okay. And then now that you covered all your leadership experiences in medicine, like professionally, can you tell us about your passions and your experience as editor-in-chief in SheMd?
Sure. So myself and one of my co-APD, Dr. Melissa Parsons, started SheMd just over 2 years ago. And it really started kind of as the two of us had interest in gender, and we were kind of coming from different places. My background was more like I told you, right? My sociology degree, that accidental 4,000 level class I took my freshman year of college. And I was kind of always passionate about gender equity and kind of how to be a woman in certain environments, right? Like I grew up playing basketball in the streets in New York, like literally. And it would be like me and my female best friend playing against these like guys. So we had always thought that women were the same. Like we could beat the guys like on the basketball court, we could beat them in the classroom, we could beat them anywhere. And then when we got to med school and residency, we started seeing that there are differences experienced by men and women in medicine. Mm-hmm. So she ended up talking about this, and we founded our Women in EM group at our institution when I was chief, and she was my assistant residency director. And we started doing some work, but like independently. And we realized that if we came together and created something bigger than ourselves, we'd actually be able to do more good. So 2 years ago, we founded SheMd, which is a website, but really it's more of a virtual community of practice for women and really men, but kind of looking at gender equity in medicine and mostly medical education, because there are organizations that look at gender equity in medicine. But as a medical student, like that conversation is like up here and like you're down here, and it wasn't being brought to the students, we felt. So we really try to bring that conversation down to the level of our learners who are pre-medical students, med students, residents, etc. And it's been a really awesome experience for both Dr. Parsons and I, because we've been able to travel across the country and give talks on behalf of SheMd. We've been able to amplify work that other women are doing kind of in this realm. And I've just really enjoyed my time with SheMd, and I'm hoping that it will continue to grow over the next, few years.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually read the article that was posted today about being a Black woman physician and how that plays a role in the experience. It was awesome. So I've definitely enjoyed the blog posts that have been going on there.
Well, we've always kind of been from a gender perspective, amplifying voices of specifically women of color has been one of the other big reasons why we started SheMd. We wanted to find a way to use our privilege as white women to help amplify work that other women are doing, women of color are doing, because we find it really important for people to have a platform to kind of express what's going on with them and to create change in the communities that we live.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that a lot, and we definitely need it. So thank you. My last question was, if you can offer 2 golden nuggets to a medical student, a pre-med, anybody that's interested in pursuing emergency medicine, what have you, what would they be?
So my catchphrase, if you will, is the use your privilege thing that I just said. I think we all have some privilege, right? Like you've gotten into medical school. There are plenty of people who really want to be in your shoes. So as a medical student, you have so much to offer the women and the men who are behind you, right? So there's also just my education, right? I graduated from college. Other people don't have that same privilege. So one of the big things for me has always been to kind of like find a way to use your privilege to change the community or the institution or whatever environment you're in at a time, like one step at a time. And you can do that. whether it's as a pre-med student going back to your high school and talking about getting into college, because not everyone's going to have the same guidance or knowledge that you do. Or if you're in college or if you're in medical school, go back to your college or go back to your high school and kind of show them what a woman in medicine looks like, right?
Yeah.
We're not all just old white men, which is a little bit of the stereotype of what a doctor looks like. And it's so important for people to see someone that looks like them or someone that feels like them in that role in order to be able to picture themselves there. So use your privilege is like my go-to thing, right? The other thing I would say is if I could go back and tell myself something, it would be that it's okay to delegate. And that sounds kind of weird as advice that I'm giving to a medical student, but if you delegate, it does two things. One, it allows you to be a leader, right? And develop your leadership skills. And it gives someone else an opportunity to kind of step into that role. Because as soon as you get a role, you should be trying to find another person to fill it, to groom another person to take over for you. Whether that's the secretary of your medical student organization, or if it's being the president of AMWA nationally, right? Like whatever you're doing, you should be trying to find other people to pull up into that role. And that's something I wish I had done better in my early career that hopefully I'm getting better at as I get older.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. This was great.
Anytime. Well, that kind of concludes our interview. I'm very excited to share this with everybody because your wisdom is always much needed.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And to all the students out there, good luck with all of the things that you're doing. If you ever need any advice, either about emergency medicine or medicine in general, or being a first generation medical student in your family, please feel free to reach out to me on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, on email, whatever. I'm really always here. I'm happy to help mentor or guide in any way that I can.
Awesome. And I will share all your website and everything as well. So perfect.
Thanks so much.